at this meeting will be live streamed. Okay. So welcome everyone. My name is Laura Fortman. As I said, and I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Labor. The meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. We are meeting for the third time as a result of legislation that was passed requiring the Commissioner of Labor to convene a working group to review and make recommendations and submit a report to the legislature by January 15th. The task was to convene a group of both employers and worker representatives to look at some very specific issues that were outlined in the legislation. And we, in addition to having this working group, we also have a website for the working group where all of the materials that have been presented are posted. And there is an email address as well, and that's uistakeholdergroup.dol@maine.gov. And that's a mechanism for anyone in the public who wanted to make comments to use that website to also make comments. So with that, I think what we want to do is just do quick introductions. We, of course, all know each other, but if there are people watching on YouTube, it would be helpful for them to meet the members of the committee. And I don't know why we've got feedback here. If people could just, unless you're speaking, if you could mute your machine, your microphone, that would be helpful. And the group is, if when you introduce yourself with your name, if you could also say whether who you're here representing, that would be incredibly helpful. So let's start with, how about with Vinny?
Hi, Laura. Vinny O'Malley, local 861 International Longshoreman, here with Southern Maine Broker Center, AFL-CIO.
Thank you. Dana.
Thanks, Commissioner. Dana Duran, Executive Director of Professional Logging Contractors in Maine, represent timber harvesters and timber haulers throughout the state.
Thank you. Sue?
Hi, Sue Hamlet. I'm a paralegal at Maine Equal Justice Policy and Legal Advocacy Organization representing the interests of low-income Mainers.
David?
Good afternoon. My name is David Clow. I'm here representing National Federation of Independent Business, a small business group, also the Maine Staffing Association.
And Matt Marks?
Yes, Matt Marks with Associated General Contractors of Maine, and we represent commercial contractors throughout the state. Thank you.
You and Desti?
Good afternoon. I'm Desti Holman Sprague with Maine Women's Lobby. We do legislative advocacy for gender equity and gender justice.
And Greg?
Hello, Commissioner. Greg Dougal from Hospitality, Maine. We represent about 1,250 restaurant and lodging properties, and of course, the people that supply them. Thank you.
Thank you. And Curtis?
Good afternoon, Curtis Picard, representing the Retail Association of Maine and retailers across the state.
And Peter?
Good afternoon. I'm Peter Gore. I'm the Executive Vice President at the Maine State Chamber of Commerce.
Okay, and I think those are the only committee members I see. Is there anyone else who I've missed? If not, as always, we have a kind of a tight schedule. Isaac, I don't know if you can pull up the agenda, but the specific topics that we have to discuss today are the items around facilitating and streamlining applications for unemployment insurance, the creation of an employer liaison program, and a review of the UI technology and the software. So we'll go through this the same way that we have in the past, which is a very, very short presentation by DOL staff to lay out what we think the task is, to provide some background for you, and then open it up to discussion after each of the items. Also, because the unemployment insurance tax schedule has been released for 2022, we want to just make sure that everyone on this committee knows what the tax schedule is. And so I've asked Laura Boyette to do a kind of a top line overview of the tax schedule before we jump into the meat of the meeting. And I hope that's okay. So I think with that, Laura, I'll turn it over to you. And again, if everybody could just go on mute if we're not speaking, that would be helpful. Thank you.
And good afternoon, everyone. I apologize for not being on video. Apparently, my Zoom is not going to let me do that this afternoon. It says I need a different camera. So, but my apologies. Normally, I would show that. Anyway, you can go ahead and go to the next slide, Isaac. As the commissioner mentioned, we've released the tax rates for next year, and I just wanted to spend just a few minutes on going over those. Governor Mills did transfer an additional $88 million to the trust fund, which was a combination of CARES Act relief funds and ARPA funds. And this is in addition to the $294 million that were put into the trust fund last year. And she did that in order to mitigate the impact of potentially high unemployment taxes, especially on small businesses in Maine, but it affects all businesses on that because we did have continued high unemployment in 2021, as well as, of course, what happened during the first year of the pandemic. And as a result, we are going to maintain a tax schedule at Schedule B, which was also in place last year. If the governor had not taken this action, we would have moved to Schedule E. And Schedule E would have represented about an average of a 56% increase in taxes to all Maine employers. So the adjusted annual rates, and I say annual rates because the figures I'm going to show you are what an employer would pay for an individual for an entire year, not on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis. So the adjusted annual rates will range from a low of $63.60 paid to an employee on the first $12,000 they earned in the year. Once they've earned past $12,000 and the employer has already paid the taxes on it, there's not any additional taxes owed for that year. And they range from $63.60 to a high of $73.90, $739.20. With an average, which is also the new employer rate of $268.80 per employee paid on the first $12,000 they've earned in wages. There are actually 20 rate categories, so I've given you the low, high, and the average middle. On that, individual employer rates are based on a combination of factors: their total taxable wages, their contribution history, and their unemployment experience in relation to other employers. And when I say unemployment experience, that relates to the amount of benefits that have been paid out as a result of a separation from that employer. Next slide. And what I've put together here is a chart showing what the taxes were in 2021, what they would have been in Schedule E if we had not had that additional $88 million infusion, and what they will be next year. And what you're seeing there is a slight increase, even staying at the same schedule. And the reason for this, and this always causes some confusion for folks, but the rates are not static. They're tied to a number of factors. One of them is what's happening with wages in the state of Maine, because the benefit structure is also tied to that same factor. So if we did not tie both to that, then your unemployment contributions and your benefits would get out of sync, which happened to us in our prior system and led to potential insolvency. And so this helps us ensure that we have enough money in the trust fund in order to pay projected benefits, and also to maintain a reserve. And the reserve helps to mitigate the increases in the fluctuations in unemployment taxes during a recession, and make sure that we've gathered enough during good times so that if the system suddenly has a huge dip in the economy and has to be used, that we'll have enough to cover that. And that is usually in Maine's laws, it's based on the average high cost 3 years over the last 20. And now 2020 has taken one of those 3 slots. So that also had an impact of a slight increase. So what we're looking at, even though we're staying in Schedule B, the rate will be at the lowest end will be just under $5 more than what they paid under B last year. And at the high end, about $42 a year. And again, those are annual cost figures there, not monthly or quarterly. Any questions on the schedules for this coming year? I mean, one thing that's really important on that one to note is that not all states stayed solvent during the pandemic. And in fact, I think it got up to well over 20 states ended up having to borrow. Right now, there's still a dozen states that have a loan balance left. And if you don't pay off within a certain period of time, that actually starts to have a negative or adverse impact on the federal unemployment taxes that employer pays. They start losing their food or tax credits and have to pay more. But those states, in states where they did borrow, employers, recovery will take much longer because you've got to restore the solvency of the trust fund, which usually means increasing unemployment taxes for employers. And if they have taken out loan balances, they also have to collect an additional amount to help pay off those loans as well before it starts affecting their federal unemployment taxes as well. So by the actions that were taken last year and this year to help mitigate the impact of the increased claim filing that we had, our employers will avoid those situations. Curtis.
So if my math is correct, that's translating to about a 6 to 8% increase, staying at the
About
same.
6%, yeah. It's 6 to 7 depending on where you fall into the 20 categories. Yeah.
Okay.
Much better than a 56%. So. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so even though this was not on the agenda today, it was not one of the areas that we were tasked with looking at, it just seemed like we had the information and it was important to share with you and give you a chance to ask Laura Boyette any questions about it. Okay. Now let's move on to, in some of these items that we were asked to explore, we're doing our best to interpret what this was supposed to mean. So if others had a better understanding of what each of these questions means, at the end of each presentation, there'll be an opportunity to discuss it and ask for and provide additional input. But the first item that we're going to be looking at today, the broad question is around methods to streamline and facilitate applications for unemployment insurance benefits that will increase access for unemployed workers, simplify reporting requirements for employers, and determine any clarifications or modifications that may be needed related to the submission of partial unemployment claims forms in accordance with Title 26, Section 1192, subsection 1-A. So that's what we're looking at. And Suze McKechnie is going to lead us through a very short presentation. And then we'll open it up for Q&A on that.
Okay, so if we can go to the first slide. So the way that
I apologize, Suze. I should have probably introduced you. So if you could just introduce yourself, Suze.
Sure. My name is Suze McKechnie. I'm the Deputy Bureau Director for Unemployment. Very new to the role, so bear with me, but I've been with the department for about 12 years. So when we looked at the problem statement, there were really two things that stood out. And one was filing for benefits in a general sense, right? What are the current options? What are some of the challenges we are seeing? And as constituent representatives, you may have different things that we aren't even thinking of. So definitely open to that. And then some of the things we're doing to already address the things that are on our radar and that we consider problematic. So one is filing for benefits. And then on the second slide, we're going to look at employer reporting. So from a current state perspective, there are several ways that claimants can file for benefits. They can do it on their own, online through our self-service option. They create an account and file a claim. They can do it by phone with a staff person. And then we also have a hybrid model where claimants and employers effectively share some of the filing. In the end, it is still the claimant's claim, but there are two pieces to it. And one of the primary ones under this category is the work-share program that Laura Boyette has done a presentation on already, but it is a very way of filing for benefits. And we saw a lot of growth in this method during the pandemic. Effectively, this is to either prevent a layoff by being able to reduce hours, and the department makes up for a portion of the hours. And it's really to the benefit of the claimant and the employer. And then there's also a way to utilize it to bring people back to work. If the employer is starting back up, but not fully operational, to say, you know, I really need my staff back. They're my trained people, but they may not be able to afford just working part-time, so that the department still has a role in supplementing some of that income and you know, kind of provide a buffer and a safety net for that. So the employer submits approval for a work-share plan. We look at it, we look at the guidelines, and we typically approve it. I don't think there's very many that we deny. The claimant still files their own initial claim for benefits, and then the weekly claim process is a joint process. We get one half from the claimant and the other half from the employer, and we cannot pay a claim week until we have both sides of that. So that is work share. And then the second piece, which was the law section that was very specifically called out in the problem statement, which is a partial claim form under 1194-1A. And this is what we also call a green slip. And literally when we have the paper forms, they are green. It's a green piece of paper and it is a green form. And it is intended for truly 1 to 2 week layoffs. We see it used a lot, and we used to see it used a lot more for the shoe factories and things like that. We still tend to see it mostly for factories that have shutdowns during 4th of July week, during Christmas week, things like that. And it is a single form where the employer fills out half, the claimant fills out half, and basically sends it in via fax or mail. We process it, and it can be both an initial claim and a weekly claim form. So this is another hybrid filing method. Some of the challenges we're seeing, and this is overall, is misinterpretation of questions by claimants primarily. We try to use plain speak, and we do not always succeed. And when we get into the pending enhancements, we'll talk about how we're trying to address that. Obviously, you know, we are a state that does not have, you know, broadband all over the state. We have an aging population, and we have a lot of people that either are uncomfortable with technology or don't have sufficient access to technology. The wait times on the phone, especially for those that have these technological challenges, can be significant, especially depending on the time of year. As a result of some of these misinterpretations, mistakes are made, which can be very time consuming to resolve. Then some of the challenges we see with WorkShare is that we have that twofold process before we can pay a claim week, and the two don't always align. We could have a claimant file their weekly claim on Sunday, and we don't get the employer information until Thursday. So that's, I mean, definitely a challenge for people. Green slips, some of the challenges with green slips are their paper process, which is never ideal. And obviously the pandemic made that all the more clear that paper processes, especially when we had some staff out of the office and you still have paper coming in, you still have to process it. It's not ideal. They are under statute limited to a single week submission without earnings, though we do have an option for the director to approve additional weeks, but it's not an unlimited process. It truly is for a 1 to probably maximum 3 week shutdown without earnings. So those are some of the challenges we have. Some of the pending enhancements that we are looking at when it comes to filing for benefits is a human-centric redesign of the claims process, and we have started this on the weekly claim process. We have completely redone how it looks and functions. And one of the really big wins that we had is that we worked with actual constituents. We worked with actual claimants. We had focus groups, and we had, you know, what do you think of this design? You don't like it? Okay, what about this one? What about this one? And I sat in on a couple of those sessions, and it was incredible how engaged people were in helping us improve our product. Because we do get, you know, caught up in acronyms and a certain speak that we have amongst ourselves that claimants don't know. So we did that for the weekly claim process, and on an ongoing basis, we're going to look at that for the initial claim process as well, which can be confusing. We have a huge volume of people who access our website and our services online, and we do not currently have a product that's necessarily mobile friendly. We don't have an app, so it is something we are working on, and hoping, you know, also from an accessibility point of view, to make our websites and our application more accessible and easier to read and easier to use through a web app. To address some of the wait times on the phone, we've had significant hiring. You know, just as an example, when we hit the pandemic, we had 14 claim staff, and we were significantly understaffed to absorb the volumes of claims. I don't think we would ever have been significantly staffed considering how severe it was. But we were so understaffed that it was truly a hardship for the claimants first and foremost, and for our staff as well, who felt that pressure of not being able to do enough. At this point, we have 48 claims reps, so we went from 14 to 48. We feel much better prepared, especially going into the winter, to absorb the claim volumes and really provide the services that we need to provide to claimants. We also, as some enhancement for WorkShare, we're working on enhancements, and Laura touched upon this in her presentation. Prior to the pandemic, we had 1 to 3 WorkShare applications annually. And the first year of the pandemic, we had over 250. So it was a product that was very manually heavy from a processing perspective. And we've made significant advancements already, and we continue to make more enhancements to make it more accessible to employers, to give better insight into the overall WorkShare claim for employers, provide access to some of the WorkShare data and WorkShare functionality through their reemploy main account as an employer, which currently does not exist. So we have several phases of work ahead of us. We have it, a lot of it outlined, and I'm very excited to work through that. From a green slip perspective, so these partial claim forms, we don't have anything set yet to enhance that or make it easier. But we are definitely looking as potentially, because it's that two-folded filing process between the employer and the claimant. We're definitely looking at some of the things we're doing for work share to see if we can make the green slip process easier and better as well. So that is from a filing for benefits perspective. Commissioner, do we want to pause here and take questions, or yes? Okay. Oh, you're muted.
This is
If you
David
could
Clow.
take the screen down so that we can see each other. That'd be great. Go ahead, David.
Yes, mentioned that there are currently 48 claims reps at this point. What is the ratio to claims being filed, and how do you ascertain what a reasonable level is of claims reps to claims being filed?
So we're currently looking at 400 to 500 initial claims filed every week. USDOL has a calculation, and I think it's 57.5 claims per rep per week. But we also still have work that has to be done as a result of the pandemic. We still have a lot of cleanup that's happening, and that's not unexpected. But what happens for us, and this is our ongoing challenge, is that once we start hitting October, November every year, our claim volumes increase by 300%. It is not, we have an extra 20 claims a week. It is typically 300%. And our learning curve for our staff, we always used to say it was 2 years. I think 2 years to be truly proficient in the job. We can train people more quickly, but it's not, we bring you in the door and a week later you're on the phone taking claims. So we have this ongoing challenge of needing 3 times the staff in the winter than we effectively do in the summer. We were significantly understaffed when the pandemic hit. We're now at a point where we are probably a little more liberally staffed than we may need to be. But we also have a lot of special projects and things like that going on. So we definitely have the work there at this point. And we also feel it's very important with our pending enhancements. We're hoping to up our recipiency rates. And we simply need the staff to process these claims. So we do have a method to it. We do have a calculation. We're hoping to meet an 80% answer rate on our phones, and that would be answering the phones within 10 minutes. We do not always succeed. It's one of those things that between staffing, volumes, people have, people get sick, people have vacation time. You're always balancing the needs of the claimant and the needs of the staff. So we do have formulas. We do have spreadsheets that have those formulas based on answer rates of the phones. And we are just trying to be really reactive in a way that maybe we haven't always been in the past.
Thank you.
Sure.
So,
I have a question.
Okay.
Sure.
Dana?
Greg, I don't want to cut you off if you wanted to go first. Okay. So I represent a group that essentially is generally always applying in the mud season timeframe.
Yes.
Is it possible for you, it doesn't have to be today, but could you share with the group the information, whether it's on the online application as they register as a new claimant, or perhaps it's the information you have on your intake that's required when they register over the phone? And the reason why it would be helpful for me to see that, because every year my members complain profusely for 2 things. One, you've already addressed, and that is they can't get through on the phone and the wait times are exceptional. And then number 2, they are supposed to, and generally always do, provide a recall date, which according to the law, as long, obviously there's determination by industry, but as long as they have a recall date, they are essentially provided a 6-week work search waiver. But many of them constantly complain that they have to search for work. They're denied benefits, even though they've provided the recall date. So it'd be very beneficial to me if I could visualize what is required for information so that we can kind of clear this up moving forward. And I know there's case by case and people leave out information and things happen. But those are the consistent complaints I receive from my members are, one, the wait times, because many of them don't have access to computers and do things over the phone. And then number two, they provide the recall date, but then they're still denied benefits because they haven't searched for work and they shouldn't have to.
Okay. And definitely, and Dana, we have, when somebody files online, the very first screen that comes up that basically says, this is what you need to proceed. So I can take a screenshot of that and I can definitely send that to you, because that's really the basics of what people need to have and know when they contact us, so they don't have that frustration maybe of not being fully prepared when they do get through to us. And two, I can definitely give basic information about the waiver process, how it works, how the waiver gets put in. Without looking at individual cases when they happen, it's really hard to say why something happened to a specific person. But I know you communicate quite a bit with Dennis. So we're always happy to look at things and say, okay, what caused this? What we're finding sometimes is people saying, do you have a recall date? Yes. Is it a definite recall? May say no. And under 1192.14, it says claimants have to have a definite recall date. So that's where we sometimes see that disconnect, where we get an answer that says, I know I'm going back definitely, but I don't have a definite recall date that they can put in the system. But really a case-to-case basis, and I'm happy to provide some information on that.
I appreciate that. And one other, just a suggestion I'll add for our industry, but obviously there are others who have definitive recall dates when they have separation because of circumstances such as mud season. Construction's another one of those areas because of the winter time. But, if there's a way for and I know there's an employer review where the employer has to essentially verify the recall date. But if there's a way for employers to be able to be an integral part of the application or claimant process so that it can be taken care of up front with the employer involved. If there's a way to do that, I think that would really clear up a lot of the issues.
Okay.
Thank you. Greg, you had a...
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Suzanne. And, I want to apologize for any of my ignorance because I may have missed something or I'm not 100% up to stuff because I know you do provide a lot of, information to both claimants and employers. But I do have a question just to make sure that I heard it correctly. Did you say that there was a stakeholder group of claimants?
When we did, yes. Well, when we did the weekly clearing process, and this was fall of 2020. So this was a group at that time that we used. Yes, we used focus groups that consisted of actual claimants, and we presented them with our new designs, and we took their feedback, made changes, made it clearer, and really took their feedback into account, because we sometimes, don't see the forest through the trees, right? Because we're so familiar with processes that we sometimes lose that the claimant experience is not necessarily that.
So Greg, to just kind of follow up on that a little bit, this is what Suze is talking about was as we were redesigning the forms, and you'll hear in the next presentation about the focus groups that we also did with employers for form redesign on employers.
So you're going to talk about that in the next piece, because that's kind of, a sort of thinking to myself, it would be really great to have that input as well, and having a broad base of people, even if you took everybody who's on the employer side on this Zoom and got 2 employers from each. I think, they need to be people that are engaged, people that have a lot of employees and people who use the system. But because through the process, and again, this may be a little bit about the next time, but I won't say anything next time, I promise, on the next one. But, there's so much to the system, and because of nobody's fault, nobody could get through to anybody because your system was overwhelmed, and I certainly understand that. But employers really wanted to help their employees, number one, and help them guide themselves through the process. And they also needed to, access people for hearings and different questions that they had. But when you start looking at things like work share programs and all kinds of things that are available that people don't necessarily understand as greatly, and I know you put the stuff out there and nobody signs up, but if there was stuff that you provided to us, and some of the onus would have to be on us to be able to get people to participate in these things, because they end up asking the questions after you've already answered them, I guess, for lack of a better term, and they're coming back at us. And quite frankly, this stuff could be, recorded and be available so that there's a link when somebody gets a hold of me or gets a hold of you, you can just say, okay, this is how that's done. Because unfortunately, in my world, especially now, everybody who runs something is working their off. So the time that they usually have to be able to look at some of this stuff is not necessarily the time that we're around to deliver it. So I'll leave it at that. And I, again, thank you and appreciate it.
Great.
So I think we can do like one more question. Sue Hamlet.
Sure. I'm just thinking about, this sort of touches on technology and the claimant experience and the employer experience and everything else. But the green sheet process, when it works well, works really well because, and is there some kind of interface that can happen where an employer provides information for an employee who is not separated, right, but whose hours have been reduced, and that can act both as an initial claim and as a weekly claim with wage verification done by the employer, right? And that alerts the claimant that they can open a claim and they can go in and resolve the claim. Like, is there an interface that can make a connection between what the employer is reporting on a weekly basis for an employee whose hours are reduced, but who is not separated, and the employee? It's kind of I know that's maybe a distant dream. I'm seeing Susan's face.
Well, no, right now, so the green slip process is very much a paper-driven process. It is a paper form. We have a lot of work lined up for the work share program. And we definitely think, because it's such, both are hybrids, right, of employer and claimant filing at the same time. We definitely have the plan to look at the functionality that we're creating for work share and see if there's things there that can be reused. It's truly too early to say one way or another. I think, we definitely, if we can, would like to get away from more paper processes. We also have an obligation that a claimant files their weekly claim, right? We have to have a claimant sign off on being able and available and meeting all the eligibility requirements of unemployment. So there is a limitation on what we can accept from an employer from a claim filing process. That is just, a restriction we have. We can have information come from the employer, and in a little bit, the next topic is talking about employer reporting. And I think there are some opportunities there to really facilitate and make that a more streamlined process. But there's, aside from the work share program, there's not something at this point that has an employer triggering a claim filing necessarily without the claimant's interaction at the same time.
No, I agree that the claimant has to have an interaction, right? Like, it can't happen without the claimant's involvement and without the claimant signing off. But it also seems like there are probably significant numbers of people who are not aware that they may be eligible for partial benefits at a given time.
Right.
and that this could increase recipiency rate by, having employers report weekly earnings for an employee whose hours have been reduced, but who is not separated from employment.
Right. And yes. And I mean, at this point, we used to request a wage verification on a weekly basis. We no longer do that. Claimants self-certify wages, and we pay the week based on self-certification. So we already have reduced that barrier that we're not, I'm sure you remember. Yeah, I'm sure you remember those weeks that were on hold until we could get a wage verification, which could be 3 weeks down the road. So we no longer have that particular barrier. So if that's a major concern, that has been removed. Yep.
In listening to this conversation, the kind of takeaway that I have is lessons that we're learning from Workshare. If there are ways to incorporate that in other processes, people would recommend that we do that. Also, more availability of the requirements, or making it easier for people to understand what's expected for both employers and for workers. And I think I also heard Greg saying something about, putting up maybe short videos, little nano things that then people could be referred to rather than having to redo things constantly. And I also heard an offer of helping to spread the information to the various constituencies.
That was just me. I'm not going to speak for everyone else, Laura, but maybe I can twist their arm and drag them along.
Okay. So a lot of rich discussion here. I think we can move on to the next piece, which Carrie Heckel is going to lead us through. So Carrie, do you want to, and this is about the employer. And the overarching question here that we're supposed to be examining is how an employer liaison contract might be designed to provide assistance to the business community in interacting with the unemployment insurance program, focused on the goal of reducing administrative burden and improving user experience, including recommendations of a funding source to support such a contract. So this was the legislative language. The way that we approached this was we asked Carrie to just kind of lay out what is available to employers currently and use that as a starting place, and then get feedback from all of you about what is it, what employer services would we be providing and how might that happen? So,
great. Thanks, Commissioner Fortman. My name is Carrie Heckel, and I am the Division Director for Bureau of Unemployment Tax Division and Employer Services. Currently, we maintain approximately 50,000 employer accounts. 49,000 of those are rated employers, and 1,000 of those are direct reimbursable accounts, which are 501c3 governmental entities and such that pay, instead of paying a quarterly rate, they pay dollar for dollar for their benefit charges and a proportionate share of claims that are paid against their account. Right now, around 80% of our employers use a third-party administrator or a transmitter to file their quarterly tax and wage reports through a bulk upload process and pay their contributions through ACH credit. The remaining 20% of employers file quarterly either electronically through the reemployment system or by paper. And the services that we provide, we register new businesses, process acquisitions. We provide assistance with questions or other issues that an employer may be having. Or a third-party administrator. We assist in understanding main UI laws and employer requirements. Assist with navigating the system through the self-service portal. And we are available to speak with business associations or any business about UI tax matters, either in person or virtually. And we also provide account maintenance. Next slide. So in Reemploy Maine, employers have access to their accounts for inquiry, account maintenance, filing of reports, and making payments, which was not available with the prior UI tax system. Correspondence is something that we continue to update to make easier to read and understand using plain speak. We actually did reach out to some of these associations and asked for members to solicit feedback. We did that last winter. And what we did is we showed them the old correspondence, and then we showed them a draft of the new correspondence and took feedback from them on, would it be helpful if we changed this word, or just really asked them if they understood it, what we could do to make it more understandable. Our correspondence previously was really full of a lot of legalese and quotes exactly from the statute, and we changed that to make it more plain speak, yet still met all of our legal obligations. And I'm going to show you an example of the format on the next slide. For online resources that we have available, we do have an employer guide to UC tax benefits and appeals from the employer's perspective. We have frequently asked questions in a tax glossary. We also have some videos, how to register an account, how to create a Reemploy Me portal account, and how to protect businesses from paying higher UI taxes. And we have a self-service manual for our Reemploy Maine system from the employer perspective and from a third-party administrator. And we also have a specific web page that's just for those payroll providers, TPAs, and transmitters. Our tax phone lines are open Monday through Friday from 8 to 12:30. And our UC tax email address for employers to email questions or any documents that we may need are noted on all of our correspondence. And we also note that on our after hours phone line. So after 12:30, we tell them if they can't call back, during phone line hours, that this is a way to reach somebody same day. And we do also use the constituent messaging portal. And next screen. So this is an example of what we changed to. Before, it just used to be groups of paragraphs, like I said, with a lot of legalese. And now we changed it. All of our forms will eventually be, and we're moving in that direction. We'll start with, what is this notice for? Why are you receiving this? What do you need to know? And what are the next steps, to draw the eyes to the areas instead of just having blunt paragraphs in there. We did start with our billing notices. When we decided that we were going to do this, we asked staff, what do you get the most phone calls on, and what do you get the most questions on? And that was our billing notices. So that's what we've started with. And as we continue to make enhancements in the system, any correspondence that goes out in relation to that, we work on changing it to this format.
You did involve employers for reviewing that, because we did get volunteers going through, several of you actually that are on the phone, to have employers review it, what we were, what it looked like, what we were trying to get to, and give us feedback on whether it was more understandable, did it make sense, that sort of thing. That's part of that human-centric approach that we plan to take with any of our enhancements on both sides.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So, and Greg, yep, I was going to say, Greg, you started
just real quickly, because I promised I wouldn't say too much, and I won't. I just am going to ask a question. And yes, Laura, I do remember doing that. I participated in that program with you as well. So, Carrie, on the list of employer services and resources, I'm assuming this PowerPoint is going to go up on the site like everything else has, correct? So is it possible to put a link there to all of those so that we actually know where to go with them rather than having to look for them? I don't mean to make more work for you. Thank you.
No, that's fine. That's a great idea. Yeah, I can definitely do that.
Thank you.
Yep.
And this legislation required us to look at an employer liaison. So if the employers on here could talk a little bit about what you see as the gaps, what the need is, and what the funding recommendation. If you have any input on that, it would be helpful for us to gather it. Great.
Seeing as how everyone's being quiet. And again, I'm not speaking for anyone but myself. I mean, I think this is just my opinion. We could solve this with existing well, maybe not existing resources, but within the existing system, through Carrie and her program, and just maybe, look at ways of being able to be, I don't know, a little more interactive with employers. And again, I think I mentioned, and you heard the video aspects of it, training sessions that are available, things that we can push out. I'm not so sure that, again, this is just me speaking, that we need to go out and hire somebody additional to do this. I don't know that I believe that when we had this discussion initially. So I think it can be done, but I think it'd have to be more than just, I don't know, lip service, I guess, for lack of a better term. It would need to be something that happened, and that that there was some sort of codification to it. I know it wouldn't be statute, but that it would be something that wouldn't just be here for now, that it would be something that we could look at moving forward and continue to have it and also make it better. So that's my thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Anyone?
I'll second what Greg said. I don't think there's a need for an additional liaison and staff person. I think we can do it with existing resources. Many of the issues that I brought up earlier, I think, can all be resolved internally with greater employer participation with their employees, especially from our perspective. Dennis Collins is fantastic to work with, but I'm sure he gets tired of getting so many phone calls and requests from folks in our industry. But that being said, thankfully he's there and can assist at a moment's notice. I think you've got a gem there, but I think the with greater streamlining and employer participation and process and understanding, I think a lot of these issues could be resolved.
Thank you.
If you don't mind, can I just ask a clarifying? So is that for questions that the employer has where they're trying to assist their former employees or current employees who are on a temporary layoff with their claim? Or is it more for filing of taxes and wages? Or both?
Yeah, I'd say not the latter, but the former. It's more of helping their current employees who are in a temporary layoff achieve their benefits, and make sure that there aren't things that fall through the cracks that just cause so much consternation and frustration with dealing with the system. I'd say that's where the biggest impact could be had.
Okay, thank you.
Harry, I agree with Dana on that. It's for construction as well. Those seasonal layoffs, a lot of that burden will fall on the small owner or the HR department to try to help provide some guidance. It's, as I think Dana alluded to, there's a lot of folks who may struggle with access to tablets and such, and so it really does require some knowledge inside to be able to provide that expertise. And I think having that, the staff has been responsive, but that's where a lot of the challenges falls on our end, is trying to assist those folks. A lot of it has to be done in our offices because it's, there may not be access where they live to, systems to be able to do that, whether it be a tablet or a phone.
I'd like to chime in.
Go ahead, David.
Yes, agree with the comments that have been made. I would say the staffing association members, they have a pretty good understanding of how unemployment works and are comfortable working with the system. Small businesses generally don't, because they have infrequent involvement with unemployment. They do not have HR departments by and large. And I would say that often their contacts are trying to understand, what form do I use? How do I fill it out? Who do I send it to? How do I respond to something? Now, the more you're moving towards redesigning forms and adding additional information, that helps somebody walk through what is being asked of them and how to respond and where to find more information, I think that's going to be its own liaison. And it'll be an on-demand liaison that can be accessed anytime during the day, any day of the week, which will be especially convenient for small business owners too, because they're typically so busy during the day, they don't have time to reach out to somebody during normal working hours. I mean, so I would say at the moment, continue making the system more understandable, easier to work with, et cetera. That also serves your needs in reducing staff time, answering frequently asked questions. Probably you get, when demand's high, you probably get the same question 30 times within 3 hours or something like that. But that'll be very, very helpful. And also that'll be very cost effective in terms of manpower and out-of-pocket dollars too.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
And it sounds like putting information, doing two things. One, being clearer on what we're sending and saying, and making sure that there's additional information there. And then also making sure that on our website, there are short videos, easy to understand directions and ways for people to get additional information. Yeah.
And maybe too, Commissioner, a program of getting that, getting the information about the information out. Just having like a series of emails, one a month or something that kind of highlights one aspect of what the employer part of this is all about, so that they, continue to go to that. And of course, we could. I mean, again, I'm speaking for me. I'd be happy to get that out, on our behalf.
Yep. Thank you, Greg. Okay. Okay, again, another kind of rich discussion. The next topic that we're discussing this afternoon is kind of a big one. It is around any software or technology issues contributing to delays, claims processing issues, and paperwork burden to businesses that may be resolved through technological means or any ways to promote improved claimant or employer user experience and interface with the main unemployment insurance system. So to tackle this question, we turn it over to Laura Boyette to walk us through the technology pieces.
Be happy to, Laura. And I tried logging out and logging back in, but it just doesn't like my camera. So it's not going to turn on for us. So just a little background, the system that we had in place during the Great Recession was 30 to 40 years old at that time, depending on whether it was benefits or tax. It was brittle. It was not connected. They were not interconnected to one another. It was way past its lifespan and was no longer supportable. But we kept it going for a few more years beyond that. But it did not like changes. The tax system actually got to the point where you couldn't make any changes to any of the programming because it was going to crash on that one. So in the new benefit system, the reemploy main system, was implemented in late 2017, and the new employer tax system was implemented in 2018. One of the major advantages there is that it's a very powerful system. It's got an extreme behind. If it were a car, the engine is really, really strong. It's very stable. It's also a rules-based engine, which means it's much easier for us to make changes to this system than it ever was in our old system. Much more adaptable and flexible. It's cloud hosted, and it has more enhanced security and fraud protections built into the system. Now, it is a consortium system, as many of you are aware. We share this system with, right now, with Mississippi and Connecticut. If we hadn't had the pandemic, they'd be on board already, but they're working furiously to get on board this coming spring. So it's a multi-state core system, which we share all of the system functions for which our states handle the process in the same way. But it's also tailored to meet the constituent needs of each individual state. So we have different variations in our laws across multi-states. And we have it's a shared core, and about probably 75 to 80% of it is the shared core system. And then we have our state unique programming as well to match our individual state laws. As I mentioned, it's very flexible on that one. And the benefits and the tax systems are fully integrated. So we don't have to go through a spaghetti code, complicated bridge system that existed before. So there's a lot more functionality that comes with that. Next slide. Benefits pre-pandemic, the reemployment system supported 9 to 10 ongoing state and federal UI programs. You may remember this from my original UI orientation on our first meeting. So we had regular state UI unemployment, we had a military unemployment program, we have a federal employees, extended benefits, we have a state unique, Maine unique program, dislocated worker benefits, trade programs, and trade has several variations on it, the alternate trade assistance program, disaster unemployment assistance, RSEA, the reemployment services and eligibility assessment. And we also had another program that has been inactive, but it's the Maine Enterprise Option Program that did come up in this last legislative session about for us to come back with a plan for reinstating that program. And that allowed a small percentage of unemployment claimants who are not likely to find work in their normal field to apply to start their own program, their own business, and use activities associated with that to satisfy work search. During the pandemic, we had to rapidly add 6 new and very complex benefit programs, the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, the Pandemic Emergency Unemployment Compensation, the Federal Pandemic Unemployment Compensation, that was initially a $600 additional payment during the early part of the pandemic, and into 2021 it came back as a $300 a week. Lost wages program, and that assistance program, and that's actually a FEMA program, not a U.S. Department of Labor. And then we had a one-time payment program around Christmas using CARES Act monies when we thought the programs were all scheduled to end at that time. And then in 2021, we had to develop and implement a mixed earners unemployment compensation program, which was similar to that FPUC program, but it provided an additional $100 a week to certain claimants on that. So altogether, we ended up with about 16 programs that are currently being supported or programmed in the system. Since the beginning of the pandemic, we've processed over 154,000. This is setting aside any ID theft claims that we had, initial claims, of which 95% were found eligible, and 4.6 million weekly claims. And we've paid out close to $2.5 billion in state and federal benefits combined. Next slide. The tax system itself, as Carrie mentioned, it currently supports just under 50,000 combination taxable and direct reimbursement employers. About 1,000 of that 50, a little over 1,000 are direct reimbursable. It's full online functionality, which significantly reduced our reliance on paper. And contrary to the prior tax system where employers couldn't see into their accounts at all online or at all, they'd have to call a tax person and talk to them to find out information in their accounts. The new system, the reemploy system, provides employers with an in-depth view of their own account, including all of their unemployment history, their payments, their changes that have been made to it. So there's quite a wealth of information there for employers that they didn't have access to before. Next slide. So as I mentioned, the advantage of the system is far more robust and stable, adaptable, powerful. than we had before. It also leverages multi-state funding for new and ongoing functionality, which has increased our capacity to remain current and modernized. The plan is, and the goal is, never to have to start from scratch again, to constantly evolve this system so that it continually can adapt and change to the changing needs of the workforce and our constituencies. However, even though the vast majority of claims went through and processed cleanly last year, there was a group of claimants that really struggled. Certain groups really struggled to try to navigate the system, and we find that even with employers, it's a smaller percentage, but it's an important percentage. And there are four main reasons for that. One, the unemployment terms and the text that we use are not easily understood by those who don't work in unemployment programs. We are, as I think Sue's mentioned, that we become very, I don't want to say complacent, but we're very used to our processes and things make sense to us. But if it's the first time you've ever had contact with the program, some of the ways we explain things and the information we provide is not intuitive, and it causes frustration, it's misunderstandings and errors. And the look and feel of the online screens that were developed are already kind of outdated, and they can make navigation confusing for folks trying, especially if you do not have a lot of technical background on that to be able to navigate. So that can cause a problem, especially when you combine it with unemployment terms and texts that are not familiar to you. And it's definitely not web or mobile responsive. And we ran into a lot of, somebody that really wanted to work at it can actually pull up the applications on their smartphone, but they don't see the whole page. So they can miss questions and give wrong information just because they couldn't see it on the screen too. So that's a huge issue for us. And it's very difficult for those with limited English proficiency to be able to adequately, access the benefits to which they're entitled. Next screen. So we have a department goal and a bureau goal, and it's actually become a national unemployment goal. It is equitable access for all, so that anyone could use the system and find it easy to navigate and use it and access the services that they're entitled to receive through this program. We've decided after last year's experience to adopt a human-centered design approach whenever we're making changes to the system. We began this in fall of 2020, and we continued right through working on some of the early things right through the winter. And Sue's referenced this as well. And when we say human-centered design, all the stakeholders have to be involved in the process. We definitely involve our staff in it, frontlines who are working with the public, because they give us a wealth of information, but it doesn't work unless we're also involving our end user in the process, whether it's a claimant or an employer in that, to have them weigh in on this process. So last fall, our first venture into this kind of process, we used claimant surveys. And we started with the benefit side of it because this was a unique period of time where a large percentage of the folks trying to access benefits had never had any experience with the unemployment program. So from a design perspective, it was ideal to find out where are the glitches, where are the places that people get hung up on this, because there was a significant number of folks that would fall into those percentages, even though the vast majority of claims were being processed very easily. So we used claimant surveys, one-on-one interviews. We involved the folks that volunteered to volunteer for this process in the design feedback, and also prototype testing before we ever implemented it into the system itself. So they got to chance basically to kick the tires on the new car and see how that worked for them. We're trying to, it's going to take a while because there's an awful lot of correspondence and web pages and everything else associated with this program, but our goal is to translate all of it into everyday language or plain speak. for both claimants and employers to try to make it easier to understand what are we asking of you, and to not make mistakes when you're trying to answer it because you didn't understand the questions that we asked. Sue's talked about the work share improvements that we've made, and those were based on employer interviews. We did involve employers representing large, medium, and small employer groups on that. And this is so much more effective than trying to guess what would make things easier for our constituents. And this past year, we've spent quite a bit of time, especially with all of the fraud schemes that were out there, strengthening our system integrity. And we've really strengthened that part, the upfront part, so that we're detecting suspicious and fraudulent claims before we've ever made a payment. Next screen. So we have a lot of current and ongoing improvement plans that are slated for this. The multi-state consortium, I shared with them all of our experience in redoing the weekly claim process. And as a consortium, we have all committed to using that human-centered design approach when we're making changes to the system, whether it's on the claimant side of the house or the employer side of the house. We're currently in the process of redesigning that claimant registration, the first pages that you see when you come into the system, and the account to make it more usable for the claimant when they're wanting to access information about their claim, what the status is, what the history has been, what their payments are, where is it in the process. And once we finish with the initial registration and account area, we're moving into the initial claims and repeating the process there. We also want to go back after that's been in place now for a couple of years to review that weekly claim application and see how that is working. Are there still places that folks are getting hung up, so that we can tweak that as well? And then we'll move into appeals and appeal filing, and then any remaining functions that we have on the system. And again, this is evolutionary for us. It is not a one and done type of situation. To stay relevant to changes in the workforce and in businesses and what the needs are of our constituencies, it has to be an ongoing process. We're also looking at, and in the process of starting the process right now of we've had some initial requirements gathering pieces for it, is to introduce a more robust text chat bot and a voice chat bot. A voice bot. And the thing that's exciting for me is that the chat bot is already been developed and is being used in one of our states, and it has a Spanish version to it. And once that will be something that we will adopt. It might not be, it's going to come out in phases, but we want to be able to introduce more languages based on our experience on what kind of languages that we're getting requests for our interpreting. So hopefully this is going to also make it much easier for our constituents that have limited English proficiency to be able to navigate and get through and get their questions answered and understand how to access their needs. And then the web responsive app is a huge one for us. And what I call it web responsive app because it's not just for smartphones. What we're looking at right now, and the prototypes have been developed, is making all of our applications responsive to whatever size screen somebody's working from, whether it's a smartphone, a tablet, a laptop, a full PC. It needs to work in that. It needs to reach the user where they are and the type of equipment that they're using on that. And as I mentioned, improved communications is huge, and that's both on employer and claimant side. Greg, you'll be happy to know that I've been viewing some nano video demonstrations. So that is something we definitely want to incorporate, and not just having them available on the website, but at the point where they're needed. So if you're in the middle of something trying to do it, being able to access, if you're struggling, being able to access a nano video, one of those short videos, and that's going to really help those who are real visual learners. I mean, I would much prefer to look at a video than read a text dense guide myself, you know. And we're probably going to work those into Workshare to start with, because employers find that trying to create that weekly spreadsheet with all of their employees, that can be problematic. They can get hung up on that. So if we can start with some nano videos in that area, I think that will be really, really helpful to folks that are new to that program. Next slide. Isaac. There we go. And also just to kind of clarify too, like I said, we're starting with the claimant side of the house because we have such recent experience in there that is just rich with information we need to be able to improve those processes. But the concept and the goal is to go across the board. So even though the employer portal and the employer side of the house is fairly is newer than we have less experience with it than we do the benefit side of the house. We are looking at that as well. I would love to see that one and become the account piece to become more of a communication hub to be able to connect with employers better through that, have a place for them to go. So we are going to be looking at that as well. And
yeah,
there's also,
Laura, just a second, Isaac, I think you went one slide too far. And
yeah, I was looking for another slide on that one.
There it is.
There we
These
go.
are the
There's my employer
pieces.
applications. Yeah. We also want to incorporate that chat bot and voice bot on the employer side of the house as well. Sue's talked again about the Workshare improvements. We actually met this morning on trying to start fleshing out the timeline for a lot of those. So that will occur as well. And again, improve communications with employer input and testing, and the communication hub I mentioned. Okay, last slide. Maine is also very much involved in two national initiatives on this that I wanted to bring up here. Congress did award U.S. Department of Labor a $2 billion grant to help with modernization. So many states are still living with old mainframe legacy systems that were really challenged during the pandemic. Many of them had to set up completely separate systems just to handle the pandemic unemployment assistance program. And now they're having to maintain those two for quite a while until we get past all of the cleanup work, which can take a year or two after a recession ends. U.S. Digital Services, which is an office out of the President's office, Office of the President, and that is a group that is heading up this process. We volunteered and applied to be partnering with them through all 4 phases of their UI modernization project, which it goes over a 2-year part. We were the only state that was accepted as a partner for all 4 stages. Some of it is because they want to take a look at what we've been able to do so far on that one, but we're hoping to get other ideas out of this process that may further make our system more accessible to both employers and claimants. And then the other initiatives just getting started, it's the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Data Evaluation. They have started a 1 to 2 year initiative to try to find out where are folks getting hung up on in terms of being able to access benefits. This one's more from the benefit side of the house. So it's an equitable access initiative, and also looking at recipiency. And why is recipiency the number of folks that are in positions that occupations that are covered by and protected by the unemployment insurance program, not accessing benefits when they're unemployed. So we've been accepted as a partner in that initiative as well. They'll be really examining several years worth of our data to understand, are there specific laws or rules, regulations, or processes, or is it the technology? What is causing folks to get stuck somewhere and perhaps not having the same equal access to the system as others? So we're excited about both of those initiatives. They're longer term, but we think that they will do nothing but improve our situation here in Maine. And that is the last slide that I had, Laura.
Great. So as always, lots of information. And I don't know if anyone has any initial thoughts, but basically based on what you heard here and what the charge was, are there any gaps that you think we should be paying, pieces that we're missing, or any additional areas that you want to recommend a focus on, or any questions that you have?
Well, I thought that was a really impressive presentation, and there's certainly a lot going on to use technology to increase accessibility. I'm also just really delighted by the department's emphasis on really talking to claimants and having them really participate, especially the people who have the most barriers to getting benefits, participate in that restructuring and using technology to make things more accessible. And so I just want to start off by saying that. And I am always happy to get requests for help us find the people who we need to be talking to make the system better. So one thing that I would be remiss if I didn't bring up, and it's really a little bit separate from the technology issue, is again, regarding sort of recipiency rates generally, it would be doing a pretest on the ACEs system at DHHS when folks apply for DHHS benefits, just to see if they could be like, 2-3 questions at the beginning of that process to identify people who might actually qualify for unemployment insurance, and not have and have no idea that they should be filing a claim for unemployment, in addition to looking for other kinds of benefits through DHHS. But it's a lot. I mean, that was listening to that presentation, Laura. It's you guys are doing a lot to try to, and I'm really pleased that we're engaged with the equitable access for all initiative,
Yes.
because that will keep us focused as a state on reaching the really the most vulnerable people, the people who have the most barriers, and who often, I think, it never occurs to them that they might be eligible for unemployment benefits.
Yeah.
So from the employer side, I know we spent a few minutes talking about, assistance that employers needed. Laura Boyette has kind of laid out direction that we're headed in, using technology on that side of the house as well. Are there pieces that we're missing there, or additional insight or emphasis that you're thinking we should be placing? Or is there something there that you thought, oh, that sounds like it would really benefit my constituents?
I don't know if I can answer those questions specifically, but I just want to say I have a really strong appreciation for the difficulty of building and revamping something like this, not only from the experience of doing it through our own associations, but I've been around long enough now that I previously served on the Inform Me board and know that that entity was, sort of the de facto agency, state agencies are supposed to work with when you're doing redesigns, but it doesn't always meet everybody's needs. But from a user point of view, whether that's as an employer, an employee, just a regular citizen, the various ways we interact with state agencies, whether it's Department of Labor or renewing your driver's license or getting a fishing license, that consumer expects some sort of consistency across those platforms and agencies. But basically, that's an impossible task to do. You guys are charged with specific needs and a population. So I just want to say I fully appreciate what a challenge this is to do and do well. And I appreciate the work, and we'll, like Greg said, always continue to provide input and feedback where we can to improve it if we can.
Thank you.
I just want to applaud the nano videos. Thank you, Laura. I think those will be extremely helpful, because you're right. You don't know what you don't know until you don't know it. And the best way to be able to figure it out is to click on something and be able to, because where the bumps in the road are, and what the often asked questions and why somebody can't complete something. So if you can, intercept them and have something there at their click, that is awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome.
I have a question. I have a question for you, Laura. So when we looked at some of the initial claim, was the initial claim or the weekly claim that we looked at?
Claim.
It was the weekly claim that we looked at that last weekend, and we put in the "what does this mean" boxes. Do we have any data on whether people actually used those?
I don't know per se. I'm hoping they did, but that may be something that we can look at and see, if there's a way to count how many popped that up or something. I don't know,
right.
But, I'm
it could be buried in a
so.
report somewhere. Who knows?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, because we peppered that application with a lot of that, and you guys helped us with the translation of, try to put that into language that folks would understand. And
right.
So, but that's a good question. Let me see if I can find out.
Yeah, just an idle thought to see, did people actually click? Did they go to them and get that information or not? Or did
it
work?
Reduce errors and that kind of things too? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Other questions, comments? If not, we had scheduled one meeting in December in case there were other issues that came up, or to do kind of make sure that we had enough time to go through all of these questions. As I had said earlier, we do have that working group webpage. All of the presentations will be posted on there. We try to get those out. Isaac usually gets those up like the same day. They'll be out today or tomorrow morning at the latest. And there is the working group email, uistakeholdersgroup.dol@maine.gov. And so anyone who has been watching this and wants to comment, there's an opportunity for them to do that. The report is due to the Labor and Housing Committee by January 15th. I know, Mark, you had some questions that around, I think, jobs in the economy that you wanted us to get to. And I think, Dana, you also had some questions. So if we wanted to kind of regroup now and see if there is anything, are there any outstanding issues that people would like us to address at that December 15th meeting, we could gather that information now and make sure that we have a presentation for you if we can by December 15th. So, Dana?
Yeah, I'd say just, from my perspective, it'd be really beneficial to visualize the process and information that claimants are required to provide upon registration and their initial claim. And then, obviously it's specific to, Matt and I with seasonal businesses, but that's not to preclude anybody else who has seasonal businesses that have recall dates. But knowing and understanding the process and information that's both required from the employee and the employer on recall, and what it triggers and who plays what role and which process would be very beneficial. And I think it just goes, Commissioner, to the, what Greg brought up. The more that we can be armed and prepared to help our members navigate the system, the better.
Okay. Great. And Matt, I can't tell. Yeah, you're still on here. Was there something specific? I think your question, if I remember it correctly, was more, it was broader. Or maybe not. Anyone else? Sue?
I have a question, Laura, which is actually about something that I've been hearing about lately, and something that is definitely the real ID process, especially as it relates to people whose identification documents are unusual, like specifically immigrants, because there have been some, we have heard about very long delays or great difficulty going through that process for immigrants. And so a little more information about how that process actually works, what are the best ways to assist people with that process if they're having difficulty with it.
Okay.
Commissioner, I just wanted to ask if, have there been any comments submitted through the portal? And if so, can those be shared before the December meeting?
If we have any, we will definitely share them. It's my understanding the only person who's submitted comments so far has been Greg. And he shared that with everyone.
Are you looking for written commentary from us? And
we'll take it if you provide it, but okay. There's no expectation that you will do that.
Okay.
Anything else? If not, yep. Matt?
I don't know that it needs to be for December. I know there's on the horizon, I think, a recipiency report to the legislature, right, or to the committee, if I'm remembering correctly. And then I'm excited to hear about this equitable access initiative and a longer term project to really try and go under the hood and understand this pretty persistent and nationwide recipiency rate issue as it pertains to Maine. So just if there's any initial work or thinking or findings that you all are either preparing for that or that you feel like you have queued up. I mean, I don't want to create work for work's sake. Only if there's things that you feel like are relevant to all of us and to the ultimate work product here that are helpful to share, because obviously for us, that pre-pandemic was one of the kind of persistent, challenging issues with the system that we want to do better on. And I think a lot of this technology work is really encouraging. And, going forward, it would just be great to think about how do we really measure success? How do we make progress? How do we chart that and set benchmarks and all those things? So not at all asking for, I know you all have plenty on your plate, not asking you to create new work, but if there's work to date for either of those two things related to recipiency, would love to just kind of get updated or wrap our heads around it.
Okay. Again, things will be posted. We'll stay in touch. You definitely know how to reach us. And we'll put together some information for that December 15th meeting. So if you have any additional thoughts, feel free to reach out with those. And thank you, and I hope everybody has a wonderful Thanksgiving, because I doubt that I'll see any of you before then. But so stay safe, take care, and thank you.
Thanks again. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank
Bye,
you.
gang.
You too.